Good evening. Welcome to the Vampire Book Club. So glad to see you here. Thank you. Starting off the super chats, JRL Studios for 1999. Happy Pride. Yes, happy Pride. It's June, which I would normally say is one of the least vampire-y months ever, but it is Pride, and that makes it probably one of the most vampire-y months ever because all vampires are gay. Happy Pride from your fairy drag mother in the name of Judy, Dolly, and Elvira, and also in the name of the girlies, the theys, and the gays. Amen. Oh, and I still need to send that scare package your way. A scare package for me? Thank you. Happy June, happy Pride. I hope you have a nice drink. I am drinking black raspberry cordial because I can. Just some Chambord, which I'm not mixing with anything. I'm just drinking it as a cordial. Seemed kind of like a Dracula-y thing to do because this month for the Vampire Book Club, we read a Dracula book. Cheers. Happy Pride, be gay, do vampires. We read the Dracula Tapes by Fred Saberhagen this month for the Vampire Book Club. And if you didn't read the book, that's fine. Everyone is welcome to join the Vampire Book Club. You don't have to read the books. You can just join us and listen to us talk about the books. We talk about the books in our Discord server, and then we talk about them here on this live stream. So if you have questions, thoughts, or feelings, you can put them in the chat. I'm going to go through the book first, and then I will go back and address everything that you have to say and anything you want to share. We'll make sure that we share it with the class. So what is the Dracula Tape? Okay, so I've been hearing about this book for a long time. It's one of those books that's been around in vampire literature since the 70s. It came out in 75, so kind of the beginning of the vampire wave that created the modern vampire as we know it today. There was a big shift in popular culture perception of vampires in the 1970s. Not just in Dracula, but especially in Dracula. We have the Frank Langella Dracula movie in which he was like the sexy one this time. This book also has Dracula being sexy and having a romance. If you've read the original Dracula, you'll know that he is not very sexy. He is very gross, unless, you know, you're into that. A lot of us are monster fuckers here. But he's not conventionally sexy in a Hollywood movie kind of way is what I'm talking about. And there is no romance between Dracula and Mina. In the original Dracula, that is all fandom headcanon, which I can see why they do it. It's a Beauty and the Beast. It's a Death and the Maiden. Of course they do. But this book by Mr. Fred Saberhagen takes the original Dracula and retells it from Dracula's point of view. It's playing off kind of on the Grendel model. Grendel was a book that came out in 1971, 70, that retold Beowulf from Grendel's point of view. It's like the monster's point of view because, you know, in the 70s we were all identifying with monsters, as we should. But the other thing that this book is known for, besides just being the vampire's point of view for a change, is that it made Dracula also literally be Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Tepes, Vlad III. And he is not in the original Dracula. That's not a thing in the original Dracula. Bram Stoker was inspired by the legends of the Draculas of yore, Vlad the Impaler amongst others. There were multiple Draculas. And he put some of that history in the book, but when Dracula is describing who he was as a general in the military in days of yore, it doesn't align with what Vlad the Impaler actually did. Like, it couldn't possibly be him. And also, Bram Stoker didn't want Dracula to be literally a historical figure. He just wanted him to be this satanic influenced guy that was his own thing. So in this one, he is literally Vlad the Impaler. But it doesn't start off that way. Like, you don't know that. It's hinted at and hinted at and hinted at. And if you know your Transylvanian history, you'll pick it up. Like when he mentions his brother's name. If you happen to know Vlad's brother's name was Radu the Beautiful. But he doesn't actually literally say, oh, by the way, I'm the person they call Vlad the Impaler, and I hate that nickname. I'm so much more than impaling. He says that like in the very last pages of the book, so it's kind of like an Easter egg until you figure it out. But in 1971, 72, Rand McNally and Florescu came out with their book In Search of Dracula, where they took the headcanon Dracula was literally Vlad the Impaler, and just did all this historical research and put out this nonfiction book that proved that Dracula literally was Vlad the Impaler. And it was a very popular nonfiction book. People loved that headcanon. Some people took it as canon, thinking that, yes, there's all these clues in the original Dracula novel that means he absolutely is that. There are not. They were wrong, but they were very popular. People love this headcanon. It became a thing. And then, in 1974, they made a documentary out of it. And the documentary aired on television, and it had Christopher Lee as a narrator. Christopher Lee, the famous Hammer horror Dracula from the 60s Dracula movies. And of course, then everyone saw it. Like, not everyone's going to go out and read this nerdy, scholarly nonfiction book. But once they made a documentary out of it, just like pop culture took it and ran with it. And so a year later, this book comes out. I don't know if it was influenced by the documentary, but it was most definitely influenced by the nonfiction book that had come out like 3 or 4 years later. This book came out 1 year before Interview with the Vampire. And there are some similarities between the two books. So because Interview with the Vampire came out after this, a lot of people say it was ripping this book off. But Interview with the Vampire was actually written 2 years before this book came out. So it couldn't have been ripping it off. Just books take a long time to get published. So even though it was written 2 years before this book came out, it came out a year after it. So it's just coincidence. I think the things that are similar are just like the spirit of the times. There were just like common logical things that two authors into vampires would have their vampires do. So the premise of this book is that Dracula is telling his side of the story. And his side of the story is that Van Helsing and Jonathan Harker, and not Mina because he loves her, but everyone else in Dracula, all the different narrators in Dracula, because Dracula is made up of letters and diary entries, so it has a bunch of different narrators, they were all lying about him, or they were just wrong, or they misunderstood. It was all lies. Everything they said about Dracula was just slander, ruined his reputation, because Dracula is actually a really upstanding guy for a vampire. So he retells the whole story, starting with Jonathan going to Dracula's castle, up until the band of heroes comes and kills Dracula at his castle. He retells the whole story from his point of view. And that's really interesting to me. So I'm like, I don't so much like the idea of him being like, but I'm innocent. I don't actually kill people. I only drink animal blood, which is a thing in this book. But I was interested in hearing his side of the story of being like, here's why that happened. Here was my motivation as a character. Here's my take on it. And my point of view of it. But a lot of the stories that happen in Dracula where they're like, oh, and the Dracula must have come back and visited Lucy 6 or 7 times and was draining her blood every night. He was like, actually, I wasn't there. It wasn't me. And so a lot of the things like that, he just wasn't there. So he's like, it couldn't have been me because I literally wasn't there. So we're not like getting his point of view of the story. We're not getting the story at all because he wasn't there to be part of the story. So at the beginning, Jonathan shows up at Dracula's house. Dracula does a thing where he kind of like tricks Jonathan into staying at his house for a couple months when Jonathan thought it was going to be a quick trip. But it's pretty innocent. Dracula doesn't drink human blood. He only drinks animal blood. His 3 wives are bitches, though, and they want to drink human blood, so he's protecting Jonathan from them because he doesn't want that to happen. And Jonathan starts noticing creepy stuff going on, and he starts getting really suspicious, and Dracula's just like, oh crap, now he knows I'm a vampire. Even though I'm a good vampire, he's still going to say bad stuff about me, so I have to keep him prisoner. Don't want to, because I'm such a nice guy. And so, like, all the stuff where Jonathan sees him crawling down the wall like a lizard, he was like, I should have taken the other door that time. How dumb was I to crawl down the wall that time, let him see me, oopsie. But, like, the scene where he rescues Jonathan from the 3 vampire brides, right, as they're, like, molesting Jonathan, in the book, Dracula gives the 3 of them a baby to eat that he kidnapped from the village because they're like, we're so hungry, you won't let us eat Jonathan. And Dracula's like, here, I brought you a baby. And Jonathan's like horrified. But in this book, Dracula's like, it wasn't a baby, it was a pig. And Jonathan just heard the pig squealing and assumed it was a baby, but I'm not a baby kidnapper. And then there's a scene later on where Jonathan sees the mother of that baby come to the castle and be like, give me my baby back. But Dracula says, actually, she was a villager whose kid had wandered off into the woods and was lost, and she was coming to me as a local lord to help her find her kid. So I used my magical powers to have the wolves that I control go out and find the kid, and the wolves herded the kid back to the mother, and the mother was reunited with her kid. Aren't I a nice guy? But Jonathan saw this and assumed that I had murdered that child, and then sent the wolves after the woman and murdered her too. What a jerk. So it's a lot of stuff like that of, I wasn't actually hurting someone, I was actually helping them, but he saw it and assumed the worst of me. And, you know, it's pretty silly. And, you know, as the book club was reading it, and I was seeing what they were saying about it before I started it, because I always wait till the last minute to read the book, so it's very fresh in my brain when I talk to you about it. I was seeing people saying, they're like, oh, I think Dracula must be lying, he's an unreliable narrator. But I don't think this book wants us to think he's lying. Like, realistically speaking, if it was all one big lie, yeah, this book would be hilarious, but there'd be no point to it. Like, the point of an unreliable narrator is that they get away with something. Dracula doesn't really get away with anything in this book. It's just his side of the story. It's not like, and then the world was changed because everyone thought Dracula was different, and then he got you. No, there's nothing like that. It's just, this narrator really wants us to believe that Dracula was actually just a really nice guy who never hurt people if he didn't have to. He didn't want to. So the next thing is the voyage on the Demeter. So in the book Dracula, when he goes on this ship, the ship that takes him from Transylvania to England, all the crew starts dying off one by one. And in the book Dracula, you're assuming Dracula is eating them one by one. And the first mate is kind of freaking out and writing about all this in his diary, like the captain's log talks about the crazy first mate. And it ends with the captain being the last person aboard the ship. He straps himself to the steering wheel, and by the time he arrives in England, he's dead at the helm, and it's a ship of the dead that arrives with only the captain's lashed to the wheel and no survivors. But Dracula tells us, actually, it wasn't him killing off the crew one by one. He actually doesn't need to drink blood that often. He's fine. He could go, 200 years without drinking blood. He doesn't even need it. If he wants to look young, he needs it, but then he just drinks a bunch of beef blood from cows. He doesn't need to drink human blood to look young. And he did want to look young, so he was drinking animal blood, but he didn't need human blood at all. Why would he want human blood? So what it turns out, the real story is that the first mate was like literally crazy. And he had sensed Dracula's presence because he had like ESP. And because he sensed Dracula's presence and he knew there was something unnatural, he started freaking out and killing off his shipmates one by one and blaming it on this mysterious presence, but really he was just a murderous, mentally unwell person, and it gets down to just him and the captain left, and then just the captain and Dracula, and finally Dracula reveals himself to the captain. He's like, hey, it's just you and me left. I really don't want this ship to get lost at sea. I really would like to make it to England. I promise I didn't kill off anyone. That was your first mate. He did all of that. It wasn't me. Can we just get to England safely? And the captain's just like, demon spawn, no! Also, crosses and garlic and holy stuff don't actually work on Dracula. A lot of the things that Dracula, the book, establishes as vampire lore, he's like, nah, that's just stupid. That doesn't work on me. I just pretend it do, so people won't let their guard down. So if I act like the crossers repelling me, then they think they're safe, and then I can get them later. If I want to. Usually I don't want to get people because I'm a nice Dracula. I don't kill people. Unless they're mean to me, and then I have to, just to protect my life. It's just, common sense. So, the captain just, like, kind of dies of exhaustion. Dracula doesn't kill him, and he dies of exhaustion. Dracula's using his psychic weather powers, because he has those, to guide the ship. And he gets the captain to tell him, like, where the ship needs to go right before he dies. So Dracula uses his psychic wind powers and fog powers to guide the ship to land. And he can turn into mist, a wolf, and a bat. And he turns into a bat a lot. And it's so like weird when he's talking about being a bat. He's like, yes, my tiny bat body. Like the way he talks about it is very glib. So he turns into a wolf and he jumps off the ship, and then he just goes like trotting around in wolf form for a while. And while he's there in this port town of Whitby, which is where Lucy and Mina are staying for summer vacation, he meets Lucy while she's sleepwalking, because he's just wandering around town in man form. And Lucy sees him and she's like, who are you? You're hot. And he's like, Yes, ma'am, I am. And then they start making out, and she's like, yeah, make out with me, sexy stranger I just met. She's totally into it. There was no coercion whatsoever. She's completely giving herself to him. And Dracula explains to us that he doesn't like having sex with people since he's a vampire. Like, he lost his sex drive when he was a vampire, but drinking blood is sensual to him. But he only likes to drink human blood. If the person becomes a vampire, then the sex appeal is gone, and it's just a platonic love then. So his vampire brides and him don't have, sexy blood drinking relationship. They're just like sisters. But because Lucy's a nice warm human, he is attracted to her, and so they have this summer fling. He's not that into her. He's like, yeah, she was no different than any other sexy peasant wench back home, but she was here and she was sexy and she liked me so much. She was begging for me all the time. She just wanted me so bad. So he also sees Mina that first night when Mina comes and rescues Lucy from sleepwalking, and he's like, who is she? Now she I'm into. But he doesn't say why. It's not even that he thinks she's especially beautiful or anything. He definitely doesn't describe her that way. He's just like, look at her. She was to be my future true love. And I'm like, all right, can't wait till we get to that part and find out why. So he moves to his London home, which is Carfax. And it's right next door to the insane asylum where Renfield, the patient, is living with Dr. Seward, the proprietor. Dr. Seward is one of Lucy's boyfriends, and Dracula's like, there was a lot of coincidences in this story, but I don't really believe in coincidence, and goes on this whole long philosophical diatribe about the nature of coincidence, and I was just like, we wouldn't have noticed if you hadn't pointed it out to us. You don't have to justify it. It's okay. And so he's looking around his new house. He's like, this house is really cool. It's all creepy and gothy like me. I love it. Love this house. And then instantly Renfield, the mental patient from the institution, breaks into his house and is like, Master, I've come to you. I've come. Please, Master, I give myself to you. And Dracula's like, who are you? Why are you calling me Master? What's going on? I don't know, he just has some kind of sixth sense, and he was drawn to me like the sense of a madman. So Renfield declared Dracula master himself. So when you read Dracula, the original book, you're thinking that Dracula had some kind of prior psychic relationship with Renfield, that Renfield was preparing for this master to come because Dracula had somehow psychically reached out to him, because he can do that, and influenced Renfield and promised Renfield that he would have eternal life. And Renfield gets obsessed with consuming lives. He's eating flies and bugs and animals. And I would have loved to see Dracula's side of the story of how that relationship got established, why he chose Renfield, how he found Renfield, how they got to that point, why Renfield was ideal. But no, this book is just no, Renfield just showed up and he had already decided I was master. I didn't do anything. It wasn't my fault. I didn't totally take advantage of a mental health patient. I wouldn't do that because I'm a nice Dracula. And I'm just like, oh, okay. And also he's already telling us that Renfield is a wannabe rapist. Renfield is creepily obsessed with women. He's like, get me women. I want to do things to women. And Dracula's like, go back home, please. So he doesn't have any relationship with Renfield. And so then he finds out that Lucy has come back to London too. And he's like, hey, it was my hot summer fling from up in Whitby. She's back to town too. That's coincidental, but not that coincidental because everyone comes to London. It's London. Of course she's here. And she's a little psychically connected to him now. So she summons him and he goes to her and he's like, hey, babe, what's up? You want to make out again? And she's like, I don't know what I feel for you. You're so sexy and mysterious, but also I'm going to be married. I have a fiance now, and I had 3 men propose to me, and one of them happens to be your next door neighbor, but I don't know that. And I have my fiance now, and I'm going to get married. And is this wrong? This thing I feel for you? You're such a sexy, mysterious. She thinks he's a Viking. She keeps calling him a Viking. And he's like, nah, babe, it's cool, but you know what? You're getting married. That's fine. We don't have to do anything. It was nice while it lasted. You go live your life, be happy. She's like, but I want you. And so they make out and he drinks more of her blood. And he's like, yeah, I gave into the passion. It was great. Feel a little bad, but she wanted it. So then Van Helsing shows up because Seward's like, why is Lucy all drained of blood? So it calls him Van Helsing, and Van Helsing is like, we have to give her a blood transfusion, which is what happens in Dracula the book. So Van Helsing is giving Lucy these blood transfusions, and in the book he gives her 4 blood transfusions because every time he puts more blood in her, it disappears again. And they're like, where did the blood go? Because you presume that Dracula is coming into her window every night and drinking her blood. But as Dracula tells us in this book, he wasn't there. It wasn't him. The blood was just like mysteriously leaving her again, or they just thought it was, and really like Van Helsing just kept giving her more and more blood transfusions. But see, the thing about blood transfusions in 1891, they didn't know about blood types. So apparently Van Helsing was giving Lucy, who had A blood, all this B blood. So her body was rejecting the blood, and that's why she dies. So it's not because Dracula drained her to death and slowly killed her off. It was just all the bad blood transfusions she was getting. And so on her deathbed, she like psychically calls out to Dracula, and she's just like, I feel really sick. I don't know what's going on with me. Help, help, help. And he's like, oh, hey, that summer fling that I didn't really care about you. But you know what? I'm a gentleman. A lady is calling for help. I'll go see her. And he's like, hey, babe, I'm sorry you're not feeling good. And she's like, save my life, please. And he's like, oh, no, I don't even know you like that. Like, we just made out a few times. I don't want you as my eternal bride. I mean, if you want to be a vampire, I'll make you one, but you're on your own toots. Like, I was really frustrated because I would have loved to see the Dracula-Lucy relationship from his point of view, but there was no relationship. He wasn't there. She kept having all the blood taken back out of her, but it wasn't him. It wasn't him coming to her. Like, I get that this isn't a romance novel. It's going to give me 4 different steamy vampire scenes of him sucking her blood. But some kind of, like, thing, something, anything. But all we get is he wasn't there. It wasn't him. He's like Shaggy in that old song. And so she's about to die because her blood transfusions are so bad. And he's like, if you get one more bad blood transfusion, that's it for you, sister. I can tell. She's like, please make me a vampire. So he does. And it's a really dramatic scene in the book because there's also this escaped wolf from the zoo. And her mom dies in that scene as well from like a heart attack. And so he tells a whole story about how they escaped wolf from the zoo. So you presume that Dracula summoned this wolf and the wolf attacked Lucy in her room. But her room's on the 2nd floor, so the way that it happens is he picks up the wolf and he, like, throws it up at the 2nd-story window just to break the glass, just so he could get in to help her, because she needs her help. He's like, sorry, wolf. But he didn't summon the wolf. He was just telling the wolf at the zoo, like, hey, man, you could be free. You could escape this place and go run free in the wild. He wasn't, like, drawing the wolf for his own reasons. But then the wolf was like, best friends, and followed him there. So he launched the wolf at the window to break it open so that he could get Lucy to invite him in. And then the wolf just like leaves and goes back to the zoo. But then Lucy's mom sees him up there and she freaks out. She's like, there's a wolf at the window, in a 2nd-story window. How is that even possible? And in the book Dracula, all of Lucy's house staff are found drugged, like they drink wine that had been laced with laudanum. And there is kind of a plot hole in the original Dracula because Dracula couldn't have gotten into the house to drug the wine before Lucy invited him that night. Only if Dracula hadn't been in the house before. But if he had been the one who had been visiting all those nights with all those blood infusions, he would have had plenty of time to get in there and drug the wine. So it totally was him. But according to this version, he was never invited before, so he couldn't get in, and that's why he had to throw a wolf at the window. Though I don't know why the wolf was even there. He was just supposed to be like creepy ambiance, right? So Lucy was the one who drugged the wine to get her maids to stop like being in her way so she could have her sexy night with Dracula and he could turn her into a vampire. She drugged her own maids and then got in bed next to her dead mom, and he's like, all right, now we're going to write a really like frantic letter that makes you sound super crazy about all the crazy stuff just happening, and everyone will just think you've lost your mind. We're going to write this letter together. It'll be a fib, and you're just going to like leave it on you. So when they find you dead, they'll take this letter and they'll be like, oh, that's what happened. And you'll make it seem like this really scary vampire came in here was just totally abusing you. Just make them think you're a total victim, that he abused you, that, you know, you didn't ask for it, because we wouldn't want them to know that about you. I'm doing this for your reputation. You throw me under the bus for your reputation. He's like, you're so sweet. So she does. And then Van Helsing comes back and he's like, she needs another blood transfusion. And so he does, and that ends up killing her, and she gets buried. And then there's the whole rigmarole of Van Helsing and Lucy's 3 boyfriends finding out that she's a vampire and then going and decapitating her. And I was looking forward to, like, Dracula and Vampire Lucy having some time together, maybe developing a relationship. We know it's not going to be romantic anymore because once she becomes a vampire, he loses his attraction to her. But they still could be bros, right? Like, I wanted to see some kind of bonding. But Dracula's thinking, like, yeah, she probably needed, like, a teacher or some lessons, but most vampires figured it out for themselves, and I wasn't really that into her. I was only worried because if it led them to me, that could be a problem, so I kept my eye on it, but he never talks to her, he never interacts with her, he has zero interest in her. And there's one scene that's not in the original Dracula book where he shows up at the mausoleum where she's buried when Van Helsing is there alone. And he has a talk to Van Helsing, like, mano a mano. And Van Helsing is like, crucifix, communion wafer. And Dracula's like, I'm just going to pretend that works so that he thinks he's safe, so that I'll keep him talking. So then he's like, he never wrote down that scene in the book. So this is entirely original scene for this book, which is nice. I appreciate that. And in it, Van Helsing reveals that he's very selfish. He's doing all this vampire hunting for selfish, sadistic reasons. And Dracula's like, I'm actually a good person. I don't kill anybody. She wanted to be a vampire. You think all vampires need to die automatically, but what do you think about how the vampires feel? Aren't you the real monster here? We're just innocent living our lives. I don't go around making new vampires randomly. She asked to be a vampire. I did to save her life because you fucked up the blood transfusions. And you've done it before, haven't you? And Van Helsing's like, my dark secret. I must kill him now. So Van Helsing is just like this jerk. And later on, when he makes Arthur stake Lucy instead of doing it himself, Dracula's like, yeah, he was kind of a sadist, and he kind of, like, got off on watching Arthur have to go through this horrible thing with his dead fiance. Yeah, so Van Helsing's the real monster, because he gives bad blood transfusions even though he knows they don't work. So after all that Lucy stuff goes down, she's dead, she's gone, Dracula's like, sadness, but I barely knew her. Then all the drama starts happening with Mina. Mina and Jonathan Harker have made it back to England because after Dracula left Jonathan in his castle, he kind of escaped and then went and got rescued by this convent full of nuns who nursed him back to health, and Mina flew out there, boated out there. They got married, they came back. He told her the whole story, and then when they're out, like, shopping one day, he sees Dracula in the street, and he's like, it's him, he's here. And Mina's like, who? So she reads his whole diary, and then she's, like, savvy to it. So now she and Jonathan are going to Dr. Seward's insane asylum to talk to Renfield, because they're like, this Renfield guy, he's onto something. So Dracula shows up there, and he's like, listening at the window in bat form to everyone talking about their plans of, they've now figured out that's Dracula since Jonathan came back with the diary, and he's like, I know who it was because he was the one that was going to come live literally next door to here in Carfax. And they're like, all right, let's go next door to his house and just, like, hunt him down right now in the middle of the night. That's a smart plan. So all the men go and do that, and Dracula stays behind at the asylum, and he gets Renfield to invite him in. So this is, like, Renfield's one useful plot point is to invite him into the asylum. And then he goes upstairs to Mina, knocks politely on her door, says, Madam, I would like to speak to you about your husband, in a very polite, gentlemanly fashion. And Mina's like, but aren't you the very one? And he's like, yep, I am, but I have some things to explain to you. I'm actually a very nice Dracula. I'm a nice guy. I'm not a murderer. I believe I've been slandered, and I would like to talk that out with you. And she's like, I don't know about this. And he's like, well, listen, your husband is trying to kill me and attack me, and I will defend myself, so he is in danger. But if we can talk it out, I would rather not have to defend myself and kill myself. So, you know, we could work it out here. I am not the instigator in this situation. She's like, but you killed Lucy. He's like, actually, matter of fact, I did not. I'm a very nice Dracula. She asked for it. I did it to save her life because Van Helsing killed her, and I was trying to prolong her life, and then he killed her again. Not my fault. Twice over. Thank you. And I would really like to politely talk to you about all this, if that's okay. And she's finally like, fine. And then there's like a cutscene, and then by the end of the night they're in love and making out. And I was like, all the hinting up to this point of how Mina was his one true love, and he wasn't even that into Lucy, and like he doesn't like his vampire brides, and Mina's the one. I was like, all right, let's see why he loves her. Let's see how they fall in love. Let's see what it is. Like, I get that she doesn't need much reason to want to make out with him, because we're to believe that he's just naturally that alluring as a vampire. Sure, any sane person would want to make out with him. Why not? But why is he into her? Why is she the one? I'm still waiting for this information. What is it about her? Like, we know Mina is an awesome character from the original Dracula. She is awesome and admirable and like a really kick-ass awesome character, but Dracula doesn't talk about that here. Like, he's not like, and she was so awesome and that's why I loved her. He's just like, yep, she's the one, I loved her. And they're in love now. And they make out, and he drinks some of her blood, and then, you know, the men come home, and he's like, I'll come back tomorrow. And she's like, yes, please do. So now they're having a secret affair. And so the rest of the regular story goes on, and in the original Dracula, you think Dracula's slowly preying on Mina until one night when they catch him preying on her. But in this version, he's just been sneaking into her room after the men are off doing their men things and having his sexy affair with her. So the night they catch him is the night where she's like, I want more. And he's like, all right, I'm going to give you some of my blood this time. And they're having like all this vampire sex. And then they get walked in on. And Dracula's like, okay, pretend I was attacking you. Just pretend I was attacking you. And then they'll be innocent and they won't suspect you and you can be my spy on the inside. So she's like, oh no, this horrible vampire was attacking me in my husband's bed. Oh, whatever will I do? And Dracula's like, shh, and runs away. So now Mina's his spy on the inside. So she's telling him about all their plans to hunt him down and kill him, which they've been doing. They've been trying to track down where he put all his coffins full of earth, all the different houses he's bought, and they're finding all his coffins and sanitizing them so he can't sleep in them by putting holy stuff in them. And he's like, yeah, that doesn't work. I can still sleep in them. It's fine. But one thing that really upsets him is, so they're taking communion wafers, Holy Sacrament, the host, and they're kind of sprinkling it up and just like scattering the cracker dust around. And that's supposed to repel vampires. And he's like, that might work on a brand new baby vampire. It doesn't work on me. I'm the OG Dracula. Does not work on me. And he doesn't like it though, because he thinks it's really disrespectful to Jesus. And he's like, you're crumpling up the host, you're defacing this holy relic, and that's like just not cool, man. Like, that's really disrespectful. And there's this one part where he's like, I could have attacked them and I could have like squashed all of them, but they were all holding communion wafers, and the thought of breaking those crackers was just so disrespectful that I couldn't bring myself to attack them, so I ran away because I didn't want to break those crackers, because that's just wrong. I can't break those crackers. Dracula, the respectful Christian. So there's the scene with the big showdown where they're in his other house and he shows up, and he had totally arranged it in this version. So he's like, hey, Mina, tell them to come to my other house and I'm going to show up there and then we'll have this like showdown, and then I'm going to let them think they kill me, and then they'll think I got away, and they'll think I've left England, and then they'll give up on chasing me because I'll be gone, and then secretly I'll still be here. We can still be like having our affair. And pouring more black raspberry liqueur. This stuff is delicious. Have you ever tried this? And I just realized that my mic is really far away. Have you guys been having trouble hearing me? I hope not. I'm just going to put it in a more favorable position. So, the plan kind of goes wrong, because when he shows up there, Jonathan, who's gone like really twitchy and like knife happy ever since the whole catching Dracula with his wife thing, has this giant knife, and he's like, oh, he's sharpening this giant knife. He just has some like crazy eyes going on. And he swipes at Dracula, and knives can't hurt him. Only wooden stakes can. So the knife just kind of will cut his clothes, but then like pass through him like air. But it cuts open his pocket and all of his money falls out. And he's like, crap, I needed that money. How else am I going to do my horrible vampire plans? So he like tries to grab his money and run away. So he sends his last coffin off on a boat that's supposed to go back to Transylvania. And he's like, great, my plan will work. They'll think I'm gone forever. But no, Van Helsing is like, I got a vendetta. I really want to like go after him, guys. And if we don't go after him, then Mina's gonna turn into a vampire, and we'll have to kill Mina. You don't want to kill Mina, do you? We have to go after him. So the guys are all like, well, yeah, I guess we have to go after him. And Dracula's like, well, crap. Now they're gonna chase the coffin down, and when they get there and open it up, I won't be in it, and then they'll know I'm still here, and they'll come back, and we have to start. Okay, so now I have to chase my own coffin down and get in it and let them think they kill me another way. So they're all like road trip across Europe now. They take the Orient Express, which is a very glamorous, wonderful train. And Dracula dresses up as like a regular dude to get on this train. He disguises himself and avoids them so they won't recognize him. And he's riding on the train. And he and Mina have like fancy train sex. But there's a scene where the only way he can move through, he can't move through the train because he hasn't been invited into the individual cars. So he has to climb out the window, or he mists himself out the window, but he can't turn into a bat because he can't handle the G-force winds. So he has to be a man and crawl on top of the train to get to the other cars, to go where he wants to go, to try to get someone to invite him into the other cars so he can actually transfer between them. So he's crawling around on top of the train, and he's talking about like how gross it is up there with like all this soot and like stench and stuff. And I was like, yeah, this is real sexy. But while he's on the train, he meets a mysterious doctor from Vienna. And he never tells us who it actually is, but it's supposed to be Freud. Because he talks about Freud a lot, right? Just Googling Freud so I can make sure I'm getting my details correct. Yeah. So when Dracula was talking about Freud earlier, he was always talking about Freud in kind of admirable ways, because he'll be talking about like how stupid the men are being and like their psychoses and stuff. And he's like, we didn't have words for subconscious back then, but as we learned from Freud later, I could have told you that. And so Freud is on this train, and Dracula just starts chatting with him, and Freud's like, there's something weird about you. You're fascinating. This is really interesting. So I keep waiting for this to go somewhere, that like Freud is going to be an important plot character now. Dracula's going to like use him for help, or he's going to get Dracula in trouble, or something's going to happen where Freud becomes a relevant character that causes a plot. But no, he's just kind of there, and he's Dracula's train buddy while he's riding the train. And then there's a subplot where Arthur, Lucy's fiance, and Quincy, the American cowboy friend, are trying to like hook up with whores on the train, and it goes badly, and they get into a big fight and they get injured. And that doesn't really go anywhere either. It's just to show that Quincy is like a real jerk. Like the way he treats whores is really bad. So he's an asshole and he deserves to die because he is the one who dies at the end of Dracula. And Arthur is kind of like a pansy baby man who like can't handle himself. And so he deserves to be scoffed. And Jonathan Harker is like this twitchy, crazy knife man now. And Seward doesn't really get that bad of a rap. Seward's just kind of like pitiable in this book. But Van Helsing, he's evil. He's a sadist. So like all these people are getting these like very bad pictures of them. And Freud doesn't end up doing anything. He gets off the train. He's like, this is very interesting for my research. Thank you all for a very enlightening time. And he leaves, and that's the last we ever hear from him. So it goes nowhere. It was cute. I like the random like historical figure cameo. And I like the train sequence because that's not a part that we get to see much of in the book, at least not in a like glamorous train porn way. I like me some glamorous trains. So he gets off the train, and the group goes on to where they think the boat is going to land, but he's used his magical weather powers to make the boat land somewhere else, so they get thrown off the trail. So he goes on ahead, and he catches up to his native people who are like his helpers, and they're like, yeah, we'll do this elaborate plan with you and we'll pretend you're in the box. But they think he is in the box, but then they find out he's not. So it's like a big chase sequence at the end of Dracula, which is like by boat, by train, by coach, by horse, by carriage, by cart, and then there's wolves. And so that whole same chase sequence happens, but we see it from Dracula's point of view. Meanwhile, Mina and Van Helsing are stuck out in the woods in the cold, and Van Helsing goes up to the castle and kills the brides. And Dracula had met with the brides before, and he's like, okay, a bunch of weird English people are going to come here. Do not touch them. They are off limits. Just like when I left here, I told you everyone within the, like, 40-mile radius is off limits. And they're like, except this guy, right? And they have this, like, random hot kid with them, like this sexy teenager, and he's like, seriously, you kidnapped the sexy teenager from the neighboring village? And they're like, no, he's from the other village. And he's like, no sexy teenagers for you. I told you, you guys are so naughty. And they're like, hee, yes we are, and that's why they deserve to die. So when Van Helsing kills them, Dracula's just like, good riddance. You were abusive to our townspeople, and that's not the way you treat our townspeople, because I'm a nice Dracula, damn it. Just drink beef blood like I do. So, Van Helsing goes and he kills them all, and Dracula's like, I felt a little bit sad because I am a nice Dracula, but, it was for the best. And besides, I'll have Mina now, and she wouldn't want to live with them. They're catty bitches. Mina can just be with me. It'd be great. So the whole thing happens where he gets back into the coffin just as it's being driven up to the castle. They attack. They open up the coffin just as the sun sets. So one plot point that was established was that he can't turn into a mist or bat or a wolf when the sun is up. So he can't get out of the coffin when the sun is up, because he has to, like, mist his way out of it because it's nailed shut. But they get to the coffin and open it just as the sun sets. So he pretends like the sun is still up. It's kind of hard to tell. It's like that in-between time where, like, the sun might still be up. It can't. We're in the mountains. It's not up over the mountain, but is it still over the horizon? We don't know. So they think the sun is still up. So they think when they stab Dracula, it works because he can't mist away, and they think he turns into ash. But the sun is actually not still up according to his vampire levels, and he does mist away, and that's what they think is ash. So he escapes. He stages his own death. They all think they win. Quincy ends up dying because he got into a knife fight with one of the locals. And so then Mina comes up to Dracula, and he's like, we did it, babe, I faked my death. And she had gotten a scar on her head that was like the sign that she was evil, because they put a holy thing up there. And she's like, well, if the holy things don't have anything, if they don't actually have any power against me, then why did I get a scar on my head when he touched me with it? And he's like, psychosomatic. He was hypnotizing you. It's a thing. I've seen mesmerists do it, where they tell you something's going to be hot, and you get so scared that it's going to be hot that it burns you even though it wasn't hot. It's a thing. I've seen it. I've definitely seen that. And she's like, yeah, that's weird. But it disappears the moment that, he dies. So they believe that he dies. So he's like, yeah, babe, we did it. We can be together again. And she's like, yeah, I'm kind of not really into Jonathan anymore because he turned into this, like, crazy snarling knife man. But, however, I can't be your vampire bride. I can't be with you. And he's like, but babe, why not? We're meant for each other. We love each other. She's like, we do, but I'm pregnant and it's not fair to the baby. And I gotta go be a good mom. And he's like, oh yeah. That makes perfect sense. You are 100% correct. I bow to your wishes. It was great knowing you. Better to have loved and lost and never loved at all. Go live your best life. I hope your husband gets better. Thanks. Bye. Maybe in, 20 years. Maybe we'll meet again. I don't know. Go. You do you. And she's like, thanks. I'm gonna go do me. This was hard for me, but yeah, I'm gonna go. He's like, okay, bye. And then he's alone forever. And he just stays in his castle. He doesn't go back to England, even though he had set everything up so that he could go back to England. But while he was in England, he kind of had this existential crisis of where he thought he'd come to London. And he'd, like, mingle with the modern people in the modern world and, like, connect with them. But he got there and he's like, everybody here sucks. Modern people are stupid. I belong nowhere. Ugh, these people are awful. So he stays in Transylvania alone, even though we find out he did have, like, some lovers along the way. And then 7 years later, Mina comes back to Transylvania with her family. She had twins, not just the one baby we know that she named Quincy in the book, but she had twins, so she has Quincy and Lucy. And she brings them to the castle on, like, a vacation, and Jonathan comes with her, and I think Arthur and his kids come too. It's like a whole big group. We're gonna revisit the scene of the crime vacation. And she sneaks down to Dracula's tomb. It's daytime, so she's, like, hanging out there. And the baby's 10 years old. Thank you, JRL Studios, for the $1.99. He sees Mina again. He's like, hey, you're looking good. And she's like, yeah, I came back. And he's like, yeah, it's good to see you again, real good. And she's like, yeah, it's real good. How's life? Yeah, no, it's good. Yeah, I feel so bad you've been here all alone. He's like, it's, I'm a vampire. I'm used to it. It's okay. And she's like, yeah, I'm living my life too. And he's like, still love you though. And she's like, yeah, babe, still love you. It's good. I'm going to keep going living my life. And he's like, yeah, good to see you. Oh, here's a ring, a symbolic ring. I'm going to give you a gold ring because you are my vampire bride in your heart, even though you have to go be a good mom. She's like, yeah, I do. I got to go be a good mom. So she leaves. Jonathan's like, hey, where'd you get that ring? She's like, I just found it on the ground. He's like, hey, it's ours now. So she leaves. And so this doesn't make sense at all. Oh, so they were worried that the kids would have some kind of vampiric influence on them because she was drinking his blood under his influence while she was pregnant with these twins. And turns out they were fine. She's like, yeah, my kids were fine. It's good. And he's like, oh, I'm so glad they're fine because I'm a nice Dracula and I want everyone to feel good. But the fact of her telling him that she was pregnant on the night of his death scene makes no sense. Because the baby, or in this case babies, in the original Dracula were born exactly a year after that day. So she couldn't have gotten pregnant until 3 months after Dracula died. So the timeline is all off, first of all. Because Quincy Harker couldn't have been born a year to the day after a regular Quincy's death. Doesn't make sense. There's your plot hole, Fred Saberhagen. Okay, so the whole reason Dracula is telling this story, we find out at the very beginning of the book, was that in the year 1975, there was this crazy snowstorm that maybe someone used weather powers to conjure up because he can do that. So there's this snowstorm in England somewhere, and this couple were driving the car and got caught in the snowstorm, and so they stalled the car and they were just kind of waiting out the snowstorm, and they saw this person walking. They're like, hey man, come sit in our car. You can't be out in that snow. So they invited this guy into their car, and it was Dracula, and he told them he was Dracula, and they're like, shh, you're not Dracula. And he's like, yes I am, let me tell you my life story. Oh, is that a tape recorder? I'm gonna record my voice on, I gotta just tell my life story to this tape recorder. Press record. So that's why it's called the Dracula Tape, and there's 8 chapters, so it's the 8 tracks on the 8-track tape. And he tells his life story to this tape recorder and ostensibly to this young couple in this car. And we find out that the young couple in the car are descendants of Mina. So these are Lucy Harker's son and his wife. I'm thinking son or grandson maybe. But he does mention at the end that Lucy Harker is still alive. Mina Harker had died in the 60s. So this is in the 70s. So Mina Harker's been dead for 5 years or 10 years. And we find out at the very end of the book that he tells us, so you know how Van Helsing said that everyone who has been tainted by the vampire does rise again from the dead as a vampire? Well, he was right about that. But it depends how they die, for how long it can take. With Lucy, she rose again after a day. She's very freshly dead. Mina grew up to be an old lady of 90 years old and then died. So it took her 10 years to regenerate into a young, beautiful person in the grave. And she's actually due to rise from the grave tonight, right now. So I'm going to go over there to that cemetery and meet your great-grandma, sir, and make her my eternal vampire bride. I waited 95 years, and now we're going to be together forever. It's kind of perfect. And she'll be young and hot, too, because she spent those 10 years in the grave rejuvenating with the vampire essence in her. And yeah, we're just going to go live happily ever after. And it will be happy because I am a very nice Dracula. And, one of the other things that he said earlier on in the story is, so a plot point in Dracula is that Renfield is trying to help warn Mina and everyone. Is like, he's the vampire, he's coming. I don't know why I'm so crazy for him. And he commands me and I have to obey him. But please, save yourselves, save yourselves. So it turns out in this story, Renfield actually wasn't doing that. Renfield was just wanting to rape Mina. He was just obsessed with the thought of raping Mina, and he was really going to go do it. And he had freakishly strong strength because he was a madman. So a madman should have freakish strength. So Dracula had to kill Renfield to save Mina from getting raped. And that's why Renfield died. So, kill the rapists, kill the lechers, kill all the people who deserve to die. And Dracula's just a nice guy drinking his beef blood and his pork blood, and he deserves to live. And that is the Dracula Tape. And my take on this is missed opportunity. Because all the stuff that I would have loved to see Dracula's point of view on, even if we're believing that he thinks he's completely innocent, because, you know, sometimes villains are like, what, no, I'm the victim here, you wronged me and I'm just fighting the system and you're the system. You know, I'm fine with a villain believing that they are innocent, but for his proof of innocent to be, I was literally not there. I'm just like, missed opportunity. Like, you're telling me from his point of view, instead of telling me why he did these horrible atrocities and giving me his internal justification that is justified to him. Like, I don't want him to just be like, I'm just evil and I just kill people for fun. No, give me some reason why he thinks that he's in the right. That would have been great villain story. But no, he just wasn't there. It wasn't him. He wasn't there at all. Missed opportunity. Oh, thank you, Victoria Start, for the $2 Canadian. What's with Dracula's nice guy syndrome? Sheesh. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of Hotel Transylvania Dracula, which, that's for children. Of course, they're going to make Dracula a nice guy, but... So, have you seen that movie Dracula Untold, which is about Vlad the Impaler if he did become a vampire? So it's sort of like, instead of saying Dracula was Vlad, it's the other side saying Vlad becomes Dracula. Just that origin story. It was a Universal movie. I didn't like it. I thought it was pretty bad. But in that was also, Vlad the Impaler was just a nice guy all along. He was the nicest guy. And I know Vlad is a local hero in his country, but in most other countries he's considered not nice at all. So, Dracula, unreliable narrator, maybe. I don't get what the point of him would be, of him telling this whole story, because it doesn't serve him at all. He's still going to go off and live with Mina. Like, if he had to trick Mina's descendant into, like, getting him access to Mina, and he told this story, and then at the end was like, psych, I just wanted to get your grandma, then I would be like, yeah, unreliable narrator. But the fact that it doesn't have a point makes me think that this author really wants us to believe that Dracula really was innocent this whole time. And, you know, as a thought experiment, it's cool, but it, like, come on, no. The original Dracula was much better because he was actually cooler. In this, he's just kind of like a loser who's just like, it wasn't me, I didn't do it. I've heard so much about this book for so long. People are always like, have you read Dracula Tape? Have you read Dracula Tape? And I finally got to read it, and I'm disappointed. I am. It was hard to read at first. The first couple chapters were a slog. I found it very boring. It was just big chunks of excerpts of the original Dracula pasted on the page and just reading over that and him being like, shh, shh. But then once it started getting to some of the more original content and then the ending and his whole like shenanigans, I started getting more into it. I read maybe this much of it today alone, just this afternoon, because it is a very fast read. I say it's worth a read if you like this kind of crack and if you think you might like to laugh at it. I wouldn't say it's worth a read because it's a classic that must be read, which is what I thought it was. People do compare it to Interview with the Vampire a lot because it is a vampire talking into a tape recorder about his life story. Also, it's a vampire with feelings, which Interview with the Vampire is, which is what made it so original. It's like, you actually see it from the vampire's point of view. A vampire has feelings. But the difference is between this and Interview with the Vampire is the vampire being interviewed never claims to be a nice guy. He never is like, I'm innocent, I didn't do it. Like, his whole interview is him saying, I'm terrible, I'm awful, I'm a horrible vampire. But yet having such sympathy and feeling that you relate to him and you sympathize with him and you see that he is a nice guy in some ways. Like, he's a very likable character, Louis from Interview with the Vampire, just through his life story. He never has to tell us that or justify it or excuse himself. In fact, he's doing the very opposite of that. And in this book, Dracula is excusing himself, and it makes him much less interesting to me. But he is another vampire with feelings, and that's fun to see. So there's a whole series of books. This is just the first in Fred Saberhagen's Dracula series. He's done a bunch of series. He was a high fantasy author. But the second in the series is Dracula versus Sherlock Holmes. And that is the book I really want to read. But I knew I couldn't read it until I read this first. So that I'm definitely going to put up for a vote for our next vampire book club. Because now I have 3 separate vampire books that are Dracula versus Sherlock Holmes. And now that we've read the first, we can read the sequel if that one wins the vote. Or maybe one of the other Dracula versus Sherlock Holmes ones will win the vote. And now that I know that Sigmund Freud is in this book, seeing Dracula versus Sherlock Holmes. I'm like, what other cute historical cameos will there be? Or maybe Sigmund Freud will come back in that book and he'll be like a plot point there. I'm excited about that. Dracula having like chummy chums with Sigmund Freud. But also he was kind of intimidated by him. He's like, he's going to figure me out. He's too smart. He can see my psychology. All right, I'm going to scroll up in the chat a bit and see if there's any questions I can answer. I'm definitely not going to see them all, so if you have one you particularly want me to answer, please ask again. It's very common. Yes, the throwing the wolf at the window, and he has to throw him 3 times before he gets him up there because he's just like chucking a wolf at a window. So finally the dog gets on the window ledge, like and smashes his face in the glass. Wolf battering ram is literally what he calls it. And he kind of makes fun of some of the dialogue or some of the word choices in the original Dracula, like the way that whenever a woman goes from being innocent to being like an evil vampire seductress, she's described as voluptuous. So he's like, Van Helsing really liked to use this word voluptuous. So then every time we get some more copy paste from the original Dracula, like voluptuous shows up, Dracula's like, see it there? He's putting all his like little side comments into the original Dracula script. And he's funny. He's got like a funny voice. And because he is telling the story in modern times, he uses sort of modern slangy talk. And when you see it copy pasted against the original Dracula, you're just like, oh, this old-fashioned speak just doesn't jibe with this modern slangy talk. Oh, so how he became a vampire. He mentions that he wasn't turned into a vampire, and he specifically says there wasn't some female vampire who turned me, because he's very much no homo. Like, you wouldn't think I'd be turned by a man. A man wouldn't turn me. Only a sexy woman would turn me, because no homo here, right? But he says that he wasn't made a vampire that way. He did it through, like, he manifested it through hypnosis, the same way that the communion wafer manifested the scar on Mina's head through, like, psychosomatic, brain waves. So he was going to get killed, as Vlad the Impaler actually got killed, like stabbed a bunch, but he just refused to die and psychosomatically willed himself to be immortal, and that's how he became a vampire. But he wasn't the first vampire, because it's mentioned that Van Helsing is going around the world killing vampires, and he killed 3 other vampires who Dracula was buddies with, and he's mad about that because Van Helsing's just this jerk that's killing people who are just living their best lives, not trying to hurt anyone. He's like, but you could. And he's like, but I wouldn't have to. If you didn't make me, I could just live off pigs. Sheesh. And Van Helsing's like, no, you're an abomination. You must die. You're the real monster. Yeah, psychosomatically will yourself to be a vampire, which he did, which props to him. Wish I could do that. There's also some more history of Vlad the Impaler's actual history. There was some talk of his battles, some of his childhood, big backstory flashback of how, as a child, he was tortured when he was imprisoned by their political enemies, and how he was tortured so much that he eventually just lost his capacity to feel fear. And that's kind of what shaped him as a leader and then as a vampire, that he has absolutely zero fear. Like, even when he thinks he's about to die, he's like, it's Tuesday. He has no fear. And that's his main plot point. But the fact that he doesn't fear anything means he doesn't fear losing anything, which means there's, like, not very much emotional stakes. Like, because he claimed he loved Mina so much, I was kind of rooting for those crazy kids, even though he never told us why. He was just like, yeah, she's the one I love. So, of course, I love everything about her, because she's the one I love. I was like, but why? What made you fall for her? Is it her... Did she say something really smart that just, like, caught your attention? What was that particular thing? Like, she's not the only smart woman to exist. Why her? And I'm assuming it was because she was smart, because that's, like, the whole thing about her character, right? But he doesn't even really seem to care about that. He never really talks about her being particularly beautiful to him at all. He thinks Lucy's super hot, and he's like, yeah, Mina, she was kind of like a stockier, like, more rugged kind of person. She'd be good at sports. But he doesn't make it sound like that's what he's into. I don't know. At least we didn't waste very much time on this book. This book was very short and easy to read. You thought his novelization of the 92 movie was really good. I mean, he's a good writer. I had no problems with the writing. Like, the Bram Stoker's 1992 Dracula movie, where Dracula is also literally Vlad the Impaler, got this author to write the tie-in novelization for that movie because he was the Vlad the Impaler Dracula guy, and he's a good writer. So if you like that movie, you want to read a novelization, he wrote it. One of the other books in his series has Dracula going up against Merlin. Of course it does, because he wrote other Merlin books too, didn't he? Dracula's just innocent. He was such a nice guy the whole time. Is there a difference between a nice vampire and a good vampire? Very true. Anybody read Dowry of Blood? Bit off topic, but Dowry of Blood was a self-published book that got really popular enough to get a publishing deal. So now it's getting published for real. So the self-published book was pulled off the internet, so it's hard to find now. But the real published book is going to come out this fall, so you'll be able to get it then. It'll be much wider spread, and everyone says it's great, so I'm looking forward to reading it when it actually comes out. Probably read it for this book club if people are into it. Did Fred Saberhagen even understand Dracula? No, Carson Smith. I don't think he did. Or he's just like the most epic of trolls for all Dracula fans, perhaps. The last bit of Mina and Dracula splitting because Mina is pregnant and the whole deal sounds similar to Dracula in Love Be Karen Essex. That's one of Mina's point of view story. I haven't heard of that one. That sounds interesting. Oh, thank you, Cryptic Coil, for the 1999. I'm one of those people who wishes that Mina and Drac could have been together, so I'm getting a guitar repainted with red blood spatter on white. I'm going to have Countess Mina painted on the headstock. That'll be her name. Oh, that sounds like an awesome guitar. That sounds gorgeous. You should share pictures when you get it. So the Holmes Dracula file is much better? Interesting. I know I definitely want to read it, especially because it sounds more fanficky, and that is definitely my trash. I love me some fanfic. Even though this was fanfic, obviously, but it wasn't fanfic-y in the same way that Sherlock Holmes versus Dracula is. Because at least then I don't know what the plot already is. This I know the plot, I know where it's going, I know how it's going to end. But that could be anything. I don't know what's going on. Fred Saberhagen did a Frankenstein book, and it's worse. The monster's a literal alien, and meets Ben Franklin. Wow. Well, of course he does. It's electricity. You gotta meet Ben Franklin when there's electricity involved. Because he flew a kite in a lightning storm that one time. Wow. You guys aren't asking a lot of questions. I feel like I may have stymied you a bit too much with the description of this book. You're just kind of absorbing it. It's okay. I understand. We can move on. Winnie the Pooh's in public domain. He can fight Dracula. Yeah, Dracula meets everyone eventually, right? He should. I want more cordial, but I've already had like 3 glasses. Not that I can't handle it. I can, but it's kind of expensive. So, what are we reading next month? I usually do a vote, but I didn't know what kind of criteria I wanted to do for a vote, and I realized that there were only 2 books that I really wanted to read next. And it didn't make sense to vote against them for each other, so I just picked one. And since we just read something Dracula related, I didn't want it to be Dracula, and we've been reading a lot of YA, so I didn't want to do YA again. So I wanted to pick something that was more contemporary. And one of them was a graphic novel, and I almost picked that, but I wound up picking the not graphic novel because it was cheaper. And I know you guys have to spend money on these books, so I wanted to pick the one that costs less. So our book next time is this one. This is Slay. It's a short story anthology, so it's a bunch of short stories in it. And it's stories of the vampire noir. edited by Nicole Givens-Kurtz. And Nicole Givens-Kurtz is a local author to where I live, and she's part of the local authors group that I'm in, so I've met her a few times, and she's really cool, and she put together this anthology, which has a lot of stories in it. Look at all those stories. So the stories are organized by location, where the lore takes place, and it's a really cool collection. So one of you sent it to me to my PO box, and when I got it, I had seen Nicole advertising it, but I hadn't gotten around to getting it yet. But then one of you sent to me, and I was like, yes, I got it, it's mine. And next time I see her in public, which I haven't in 3 years because of COVID, but I will see her again, and I can get her to autograph it for me. Slay, Stories of the Vampire Noir, a revolutionary anthology celebrating vampires of the African diaspora. Slay is a groundbreaking, unique collection and will be a must-have for vampire lovers all over the world. Slay aims to be the first anthology of its kind. So I guess the first, completely black anthology? Few creatures in contemporary horror are as compelling as the vampire, that is true, who manages to captivate us in a simultaneous state of fear and desire. Drawing from a variety of cultural and mythological backgrounds, Slay dares to imagine a world of horror and wonder where black protagonists take center stage. As vampires, as hunters, as heroes. From immortal African deities to resistance fighters, matriarchal vampire broods to monster hunting fathers, coming-of-age stories to end the life of stories. Slay is a groundbreaking Afrocentric vampire anthology celebrating the rich cultural heritage of the African diaspora, featuring anchor stories by, these people, there's a lot of people in here. So a lot of very short stories. And you can get it for Kindle. I think it's $8 on Kindle. You probably won't be able to find it in a library because it is pretty new. I think it just came out last year. The copyrights on the stories are all 2020, but I think it was, the book itself was put together in 2021. So it is pretty new. But you should spend money on it because supporting these authors would be really good for the book market landscape. This isn't a big corporation. You're not supporting Amazon. You can buy it on any book selling site. And you should spend money on it if you have the money to spend. I know it's hard sometimes if you can't find a book in the library or if you can't get a free copy. But if you do have the $8 to buy that Kindle version, this is be a good cause. I'm just saying, put your money in good places. Support more books like this because more books like this need to exist. So if they see that people are paying for them, they'd be more likely to make more books like that in the future. So I'm looking forward to that. I thought a short story anthology would be good for us. We read one a couple months ago. We read a young adult short story anthology, but this one is an adult, and it has more of an urban fantasy flair than the young adult short story anthology we read recently. So I'm excited about that. And if I get to meet the author, I can tell her that my book club is reading her book. And by author, I mean editor. She's the one who put together. She's the owner of the publishing house that put together, which is a local publishing house. I don't know that it will be sexy vamps all the way. Yes, there's obviously a very sexy vamp on the cover, but it sounds like there's a great variety of stories in here, and I'm sure some of them are sexy, but I think most of them are just, I would just say grittier than the young adult ones, maybe gorier, maybe darker, probably darker themes dealing with more existential dread and that kind of stuff. Yeah. I realized I had heard of the Victoria Schwab story First Kill as I was watching the first episode on Netflix. Maybe one of these will get the same glow up. That would be nice. First Kill was in that young adult anthology I was just mentioning that we read a few months ago, and now they've made a show out of that story, an entire show out of a very short story, so I'm curious to see how that is. I haven't checked it out yet. A Vampirus miniseries? You mean like John Carpenter's Vampirus? I feel like it would be just like The Walking Dead. I'd like to see how they can make it different. And I'd like to see more women in it. That would be nice. First Kill is about a vampire hunter, teenage vampire hunter trying to kill her first vampire, and a teenage vampire trying to kill her first victim. And then they fall in love, and they're both teenage girls, so it's gay. And all of the advertising for the show has shown them kissing, which has really bugged me because I'm like, yeah, it's a romance, but you're putting these two sexy, nubile teenage girls making out on every single piece of advertising makes me think that you're just trying to get people looking for underage girl-on-girl action, and that's the only audience you're catering to. Like, there's so much more to this story, from what I read in the book, than the romance. And that had me a little concerned. Maybe it's just the marketing department I should be concerned about, not the actual show. Maybe the show is not catering to that, but it did make me a little worried. But I gotta go watch it. But speaking of watching vampire things, I did watch the new thing on Netflix, Vampire in the Garden. I really enjoyed that. Did not have a happy ending, but I like tragedy sometimes. But just watching the first episode of Vampire in the Garden, I was like, yes, this is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm looking for in vampires. I love the way the vampires are dealt with in that. It's an anime. It's 5 episodes, so it's not like a series. Someone said it was a movie that they then chopped into 5 episodes, which makes sense. I could see it, though it was edited in a way that each felt like an episode. So Vampire in the Garden, you should all go watch it. It's very short. Very cute and sweet and dark and scary and gritty. There's a lot of blood and gore. It's like post-apocalyptic war zone meets vampire ballrooms. You know, my kind of aesthetic mash. Oh, so the marketing is not correct for First Kill. That's good to hear. It gives me hope. I gotta go watch it. Can I tell you any more about the indie movie in which I play Bodhisattva now? I don't know if I can. I actually haven't heard from them in a while. You know, indie movies can sometimes take years to make, but I haven't gotten any communication that's like, yes, talk about it now, or it's coming out, or anything yet. So I suppose I could reach out to them and ask myself, but I haven't heard anything about it since. Which is fine. It'll happen when it happens. Making a movie during COVID is rough. But when I can, I will definitely tell you, like, what it's called and where you can watch it and so on and so forth. Yeah, Vampire in the Garden, man. That stuck with me. It had really good soundtrack, really good music. You should definitely watch it. It's only 5 episodes. So, let me know what kind of book you want to read next after we read this short story anthology. We'll try to switch to something, keep the variety going. So, we could read that graphic novel I was talking about. The problem with the graphic novel is I really want to read it, and it's big, so it's not like reading something super short. Like, it's bigger than this book. But it's kind of expensive. Like, the Kindle version is $14, and I was worried that people wouldn't be able to afford it. But it's also one of those people who's like, you should support them, spend the money. But I'll talk more about that perhaps next time. Or we'll read something else in the meantime, and then we might come back to that later, so you're not spending money on books back to back. Like, we could read something that's much more popular that you can find in the library more easily. Any book that you see on this shelf back here that we haven't read yet, let me know in the Discord server what kind of book you want to read next, and then I will choose 3 or 4 and we will vote. Since we didn't get to vote 2 months in a row now, I owe you a vote. The link to the Discord server is in the description of this video. Anybody can join. It is a free Discord server thanks to the support of my Patreon patrons, which without them supporting my Patreon, I would not be able to run the Discord server or this book club. Even though it's free for everyone else and they can join, you should thank them. They are wonderful people. We do a lot more in the Discord server than just the book club. The book club is locked, so if you want to be in it, you have to press the icon to unlock it. Otherwise, we keep it just for the people in the book club. Not because we say anything secret or private. It's just, that's the way it's set up. And you don't have to read the book to be in the book club, so you could join the Discord server, join the book club, and not read the books. It's fine. You just sit there and lurk and watch the rest of us talk about the books. Just be there. Join the Discord server. We talk about vampires. We talk about gothic stuff. Pretty much anything that I like is a relevant topic on there, but it is a themed Discord server, so it's not just like random people talking about their lives. It's like we're talking about fan things or media in some way most of the time. We're sharing vampire-related memes, because there's so many of those. Laszlo, the serial killer vampire retelling. Oh, that's what you want to read next? Maybe I could do, like, the theme could be books that are vampire books, but that don't actually have any vampires in them. So in that one you're talking about is, it's a Dracula retelling, but he's not actually a vampire. He's just a serial killer, but it's still Dracula, so it's still technically a vampire book. And I have a few like that. Like, one's Elizabeth Bathory. She wasn't technically a vampire either, but she's known as the Vampire Countess, so we could put those together and vote for them. That would be a good idea. What vampire media would I recommend for Canada Day on July 1st? I didn't know that was Canada Day. Congratulations, Canada. You have a day. Canadian vampires? I don't know. Forever Night? Tell me your Canadian vampire recommendations. Help out Simon Peter Hughes. Tell them what they should watch. What time is it? Oh, it's 9:48. So we've been here an hour and 15 minutes. That's usual. How many people are technically vampires? Like, in the world? I don't have that statistic. I don't have it. Well, thank you for joining me for the Vampire Book Club. If you would like to discuss things further, we can take this conversation to the Discord server and chat about it there. Otherwise, I will see you next month. The live streams are always around the 13th. You have until July 13th to read Slay, because it does have many stories in it. You don't have to read all the stories. You just read the stories you want. I will read all the stories and tell you about all the stories, so if you miss some, you'll be able to pick up on the ones that I did. Maybe I should take notes. I usually don't take notes on the books. I just kind of read it, remember the best I can, and then ramble off the top of my head. But since there's so many stories in this, I should probably write some stuff down. All right. Go get a drink. Have a good night. We'll talk more later on the Discord server, on YouTube. Leave me comments on this video, even if you've been in the chat, because comments help the algorithm, and then more people will see this video, and everyone will be happy. Don't you want everyone to be happy? I know you do. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining the Vampire Book Club and talking about vampires with me, because nobody else does. I love you. I need you.